Hello YouTube! If you are new to the channel, my name is Zach Calvin, and in today's video we're going to be going over the process of fixing a CV axle. Now I'm going to be doing this on my 2014 Camaro SS drift car, but just know that these steps are going to be honestly similar to every car that has a CV axle. This can be front wheel drive cars, rear wheel drive cars, but if you own a 2010 to current Camaro, the exact steps that I'm doing are likely going to be what you do. If you own a different vehicle, again, what I'm going to be covering is very generic. So this is going to show you how you can, one, diagnose if you have a bad CV axle, and two, what steps you need to take to fix it. So before we hop into the video, please make sure you consider smashing the like button and subscribe while you're here. As you can see, I'm not in a fancy shop. I'm just an average guy in my garage. So these videos are meant to help you, and if it does, smash that like button and subscribe while you're here. Now I have with me a socket extension that's going to kind of demonstrate what a CV axle does in layman terms. As you can see, there is a swivel on the end here, and that's effectively what a CV axle is. This would connect to your differential, and then this would connect to the wheel. As this turns, as you can see, this has a little bit of flex, if you will, to allow for suspension changes and things of that nature. And that is going to connect the differential, which goes to the transmission, ultimately to your wheel to rotate the wheel. Now what happens is this boot generally will rip, and eventually your CV axle gets toasted because it doesn't have the lubrication in the axle that it needs. So I'm going to show you, one, how to diagnose it, and two, how you can fix that. Okay, so before we start talking about how you would diagnose a bad CV axle, I want to show you what exactly a CV axle looks like. I've actually ordered a ton of spares because for my specific car, and if any of you out there have a 2010 to current Chevrolet Camaro, GM is very bad about the quality of their axles. If you lower your vehicle or you add any power at all, it seems like that significantly decreases the life that you would get out of the factory axle. I've had to change the axles on my car probably 3 times. So I'm going to show you what an axle looks like before we jump into how you would diagnose a bad axle. Okay, so this is effectively what one looks like. So as you can see, one side goes into the differential or transmission. So if it's a front wheel drive vehicle, this likely is going into your transmission directly. And then the other end is going to connect to your wheel hub. That's going to effectively connect the transmission and or differential to the wheel. So this effectively is what a CV axle looks like. As you can see, it is a solid piece of metal, and there's a boot generally on both sides of the axle. Now, how to tell if your axle is going bad is, one, you're gonna find a lot of axle grease around the wheel well. So for example, my passenger side rear axle is failing, so I'll show you guys how axle grease is just plastered all over the underneath side of the car. But this boot effectively is what goes bad, and this can be because of a couple of reasons. You've lowered your car too much, or you've raised your car too much, and that causes the geometry of the axle, instead of being like this, to be all the way pointed up. That's going to add a lot of extra stress onto the rubber boot. Or just over time, these boots are, since they're rubber, they're going to dry rot. Your environment can accelerate that, so if you drive on the beach a lot, or if you are in a northern state where there's a lot of salt laid down on the winter seasons, that can accelerate the rubber boot dry rotting. Now there's a couple of ways that you can fix this. I've seen some people take shoe glue, since that's a rubber type material, and apply it to the small section that rips on the boot. For me personally, I would say that's kind of a band-aid, and that ultimately is going to rip again. Or you'll notice that there are clamps on the CV axle. What you can do is take the CV axle out of the car, take these clamps off, and for your vehicle, they're likely going to make a CV boot kit, which will come with the new boot, new clamps, and sometimes the axle grease that you need to put a new boot on. Now, since I already have this axle, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the old one out of the car so you can see what a ripped one looks like, and put this one back into the car. Okay, so let's talk about diagnosing the issue. There's grease all around the boot. There's grease all around the car. You can see it a lot on the lower control arm right there. So this tells me that that CV joint is bad. Now the only way to truly fix this is to remove this from the car. You could try the shoe glue method, but again, in my opinion, that's just a band-aid. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove this axle entirely from the car. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and take this axle out. Now the steps to do this will vary, but ultimately each car is gonna have what's called an axle nut. You need to take this axle nut off, and then you need to maneuver this hub around in order to get that axle out. Again, each car is going to be different. Some cars are going to require you to take the brakes completely off, the rotor completely off. What I'm going to try to do is I'm just going to loosen up the lower control arm, the upper control arm, and just try to simply pry down the hub, and that should give me enough clearance to pull out this axle. So let's go ahead and get the right size socket and pop this axle nut off. Okay, so I got my socket. For me, that's going to be a 36 millimeter. Usually it'll range from 28 to almost 40 millimeter socket size, depending on the vehicle that you have. Now, full transparency, this is probably going to be the most laborious activity that you have to do because it requires such great force to break this loose. Now, I've done a couple of things to hopefully help me with that process. What I've done is I've placed a screwdriver into the vent of the rotor. And what that's going to do is that's going to lock it against this caliper as I rotate it. So rather than rotating the whole hub assembly, that'll keep it locked in place, which will hopefully make it easier. Another thing that you can do is get some sort of extension bar. Now I'm just using the bar from my hydraulic jack, and that's going to extend the length of my breaker bar, which gives me more leverage, which hopefully will require less effort. So let's go ahead and do that. As you can see, this sucker is on there. Wow. And that sucker is definitely in there. Another trick you can do is heat it up with a torch. So when you heat up metal, it expands a little, and that should give us the advantage we need, hopefully, to pop this off. So go ahead and turn this on. Again, be careful that you're not near fuel lines or anything like that. I do have my fuel tank right here, so I got to be very careful to only heat up the axle. Now while it's still warm, we're going to pop this on and see if that helps us. There we go. Wow. That one was on tight. All right, there we go. There's the axle nut popped off. What I'm gonna do now is take a hammer and just hit the end of the axle just to break it loose. All right, you wanna make it to where it's moving freely around in the hub. Then you should be able to maneuver it enough with your hands to take it out. So there we can see. That should be good enough. There we go. Oh yeah, so I would say some shoe glue would not fix that issue. As you can see, I have a very huge rip, and that's gonna cause a lot of noise and a lot of issues. And eventually this will honestly break. So it's good that I caught it when I did. Okay, so what I would like to do before I put the axle back in is just to address all the grease that's on the underneath side of the car. I'm gonna use some super clean degreaser. You can get this at Walmart, but what I like about this is it is a foam degreaser, so you spray it on, let it sit for a while, and it comes off so easily. So this is my go-to. I've already sprayed some on. Now I'm gonna go ahead and hose it off. Now the process for installing the axle, in my opinion, is pretty straightforward. You're just going to install it in the reverse order that you took it out. Okay, there we go. And then what I would recommend is hand tightening the axle nut just to keep everything in place. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. I hope you all enjoyed this video. You're welcome to hang around as I do a time lapse of tightening everything back up. Otherwise, I hope this video helped you. Thanks for watching. If anything on your vehicle was different, feel free to leave a comment, and I'm happy to help in the comments as best I can. And we'll see you next time.